everyone. It's Saturday morning here in India. And good evening, Sana, and afternoon to everyone, whosoever is in whichever time zone. So, this is the first time we are conducting the workshop in the morning, and I hope there might be a little confusion, but that's okay. I think we'll manage that. So, yes, we are back with a very interesting topic, and let me ask you a question: like, how many times you've heard, "Hey, learn UX to start your career in design. UX is hot in the market. UX is this. UX is that." But how do you really know if this is what you want to pursue or want to do it, right? If this is the right fit for you? We are here with the answer. Today we have Sana. Sana is a UX designer. She's currently working at Amazon. Her journey is not of a traditional designer, neither is mine. And she was originally an architect student. She switched her majors to finance and then worked there for 3 years with the big brands. Then somehow she stumbled across UX and UI, and she has worked with Thomson Reuters, Afterpay, and First Republic Bank as UX and UI designer. I hope I'm correct, Sana.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So after that, she also has her own clothing and jewelry brand called Maqsood. I'll share the link. I think that's what every lady loves. Owning her own jewelry and clothing brand. That's my dream too. But yeah, let's start, Sana.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to do this. So today we're going to be talking all about UX, if it's the right fit for you. And so I'm going to be going through a lot of my own story. So I myself have like a very interesting story, as Rakshia mentioned. So today we're going to be walking through my journey. I'm going to be talking you through the same kind of some of these tidbits that she shared already. Where I used to work, how did I get to where I am? And then we'll walk through topics that I learned in my boot camp and that helped me with my transition to UX. From there, we'll move into how to land like good projects for you to basically get onto your portfolio. And then we'll move on to finding a mentor, which is extremely, extremely important. And then lastly, how to land your first UX gig. So as it was mentioned, I'm Sana. I'm currently a UX designer at Amazon. I'm located in New York City. I founded my own jewelry and clothing brand almost 3 years ago now. And then I'm currently a mentor at Springboard, which is a boot camp as well. I think it's based in the US. And then I'm also a master's student studying digital media at NYU. So let's talk about just my journey in general. And so as I mentioned, there's my UX journey and then there's my journey before that. So first and foremost, we'll go through like some of the work that I've done currently. And I think all of this is really important, again, to talk about like how there's so many folks that are transitioning into UX. And I just kind of want to give you the right tools and skill sets of like how to talk about that transition and kind of make that transition completely. So for me, my first UX role was actually when I was at Thomson Reuters, and I was working on enterprise products. And then I moved to Afterpay, which was a contract, and I worked on consumer and merchant products. I started my own, retail e-commerce brand. And then I worked at First Republic Bank for mobile apps. And then I'm currently at Amazon and I've been here for a year and a half now. And so I got a chance to work on some internal tools, but now I'm on the shopping retail side. But before that, I had a completely different experience and I was in a completely different world. I was actually working in finance. And so I think that's really important to touch on because throughout this presentation, I'll talk you through like how did I storytell and transition from this finance world into UX. So before that, I was working at Thomson Reuters as a customer success manager. And then I worked at NASDAQ as an account manager. And then prior to that, I worked at PwC and risk assurance associate. So talking about education, I became a UX designer completely with a certificate program, a boot camp. Again, as you can tell, like, you know, my story is a success story of getting into the field completely without you know, an undergrad or college degree or master's degree in UX. So it's extremely possible, and also you can be extremely successful. And so, as mentioned, I was originally an architecture student at University of Chicago, ended up leaving. I graduated with a finance degree in Chicago, a university called DePaul University. And then I did a certificate program through UC Berkeley, which took me about 2 years to complete. And I'll be going through some of those courses with you today. And then I finally last year started going to NYU for digital media. But again, that happened after I was working in the field for a few years. So my master's didn't necessarily help me get into the UX field. And then some like creative hustles. I used to do a lot of photography. I used to do art direction. So these are some photos that I've taken and kind of done art direction for. And then this is actually my brand on the right that I design a lot of the jewelry for. And I think this is like really important, right? So obviously, you know, if you're looking to do an industry switch and so look and ask yourself, like, what is it that you do that's creative that you can easily bring and talk about in your portfolio or talk to people when you're interviewing of like, this is what makes me unique. And this is something that I've been doing for a long time that I may not have been doing in my day-to-day job. And photography was one of those things that I did even when I was working in finance. So I was able to bring that in when I did make that switch into UX. Cool. So topics I studied and covered. So as I mentioned, I had done the UC Berkeley Extension certificate. Again, obviously ProApp is a great place to get education. There's so many great tools out there to get educated for UX. So today I'm just going to be talking you through like topics that I learned, and then what I did with the work from each one of these projects. So for this bootcamp that I had taken, each one of these topics, as you can see, was a 2-month class. And so I did this over 2 years because I was working full-time at Thomson Reuters. And so as you can see, we walked through every single part of the process and really broke it down. So I had a really good understanding of, for example, like what user research was. So again, in here, we have UX design process, prototyping and diagramming, user interactions, visual design, information architecture, HTML, CSS. I took a portfolio class and then a user research class. And again, so as I mentioned, because I didn't come from a design background, I wanted to make sure that I dove into every single part of the process. And so today I'm going to be touching on some of these topics. And so we'll dive into it a little bit. But first and foremost, before we even dive into some of the later topics, I think it's really important just to touch on like, what is UX and like, what is that lens that we problem solve and what is that design process? So first and foremost, design thinking. This is a really, really famous concept. And again, this comes from Stanford D schools. A lot of a lot of companies, for example, like Amazon, we take from this and we create our own UX process and version from it. So the first step is empathize. Again, that's the whole point of like being a UX designer. It's really putting yourself into the user's shoes, empathizing, understanding what it is that they're looking for, figuring out what those problems are and like solving for the problem. Define would be, again, when you start to like solve for that problem, this would consist of defining like your persona, figuring out like what it is they need, what type of features you want to incorporate, that kind of thing. Ideation, I think this is my favorite step. When you start to think about as many ideas as you possibly can, you're brainstorming, you're doing how might we's, and then prototyping, right? So now you're actually going to see it come to life. And prototyping can be in lots of different different forms. It could be paper prototypes, low fidelity, high fidelity, and then lastly, you're going to test. And once you test, you'll get your information validated or not, and then you'll have to go back and iterate your designs. So from there, that's your design thinking. So a lot of companies will take that and kind of create their own UX process. And so now this is specific. And again, depending on what company you work for. So as I mentioned, I've worked in startups, which is Afterpay was a startup. I was the first designer, and now working at Amazon, which I'm part of like 4,000 designers. This UX process can be so different. So just know that also processes at different companies and different sizes are different, along with like how fast you move through this process is extremely different. So again, you'll do your research, you'll design, your prototype, validate, and then you'll go through that circle. The only extra steps will be obviously to build, to QA test it, and then to launch it. So quickly talking about research, again, this is like where you're going to basically try to understand the full problem. This could be where you're potentially asking, product managers questions. You could be talking to your customer support team. You could be asking a lot of questions. You could do a competitive analysis. You could also ask the market and do surveys or stakeholder interviews, of like what problems are coming up. How can you make the product better? You could potentially look at creating empathy maps or doing a UI heuristics evaluation. Again, the list goes on. I think with this class and when we learn UX process, it's really about understanding like every step and kind of like what you can do, but being flexible and being able to know, okay, I've learned all these steps, which steps should I actually use in my project? So again, this class taught me a lot of like, here's it all. And then from there, I learned to build my instincts of like what I should be doing. And then again, for define, you're going to be doing, creating personas, you're looking at creating concepts, you're doing brainstorming sessions. As I mentioned, that could be your how might we's, that could just be with like getting together with a team and thinking of as many ideas as possible. And then lastly, you could potentially, create your product road mapping features as well. Next, in your design process, you have your design. As you can see here, from right to left, you have your low fidelity, your medium fidelity, and your high fidelity. So this is a great example of kind of like design iterations that you'll be going through. And again, like depending on your project, depending on how fast you need to move, you might not be doing every single step. It really just depends. And again, as a designer, it's your job to kind of figure out what is the right step and what will be useful for my team. Is it useful for us to quickly do some low fidelities and test, or is it better for us to jump to high fidelity? And so for Amazon, I can say like I've done both, where I've started at low fidelity designs, but I've also jumped straight into high fidelity of tight deadlines. So it really just depends on being adaptive and flexible. And then, we're going to test and validate. And this is, again, you could do anything from usability tests, which is testing your prototypes and designs. You can actually talk to your customers. And then lastly, you can do A/B testing to see, is the current design better or is our old design? And if you're getting the success metrics that you wanted to. And then build, right? This is like where you're going to be working with your development team and you're going to hand off your designs. And I think what's great about this is, you'll actually start to see them come to life. But this is also where you'll have to work on potentially like creating handoff documents and also an accessibility deck and copy annotations. And so this is kind of that phase of like, now you're passing your work on to actually get developed. And then lastly, or second to last, you're going to have your designs get QA tested, which will just check if they're working and if it's at the highest quality for your customer. And then the last step obviously is launch. So this is the most exciting part because now you have shipped your designs as a UX designer, and this is the best part to kind of see it live. So that was like just a quick rundown of the UX design process. Again, I just wanted to walk through it really high level. And so I'm going to walk through some of those other courses as I mentioned and what I learned. So for the prototyping and diagramming class that I had taken, it was pretty heavy on like 3 main areas. The first one being designing and diagramming, the second one being testing, and then the last one being ways to synthesize. So for designing and diagramming, we focused really heavy on learning Figma. We also focus really heavy on how to create paper prototypes, how to create low fidelity wireframes, how to create medium fidelity wireframes, how to create high. We learned things like componentizing buttons and what a design system is and how that comes into place. And then the second area was really big on testing, right? So we did quick guerrilla testing. This was a class where we took surveys. We also did usability and interview testing. So all the designs that we were creating, we were able to validate them right away. And then from there, we were also synthesizing our work. So this is where we were actually getting into persona building. We were creating empathy maps, which was like, what the pain of a user is, what the gain of a user is, and how this product can potentially make that better. And so I think, some other topics we had covered were different brainstorming skills of like how to think about different ideas. There were great cards that you can get to help you brainstorm. I think IDEO has a great deck, and I can send the link where if you feel stuck and you need some new ideas, it's a deck of cards that you can go through to kind of get you to think about potentially new solutions. And again, so this class specifically, I think it helped me, one, as I mentioned, like learn all these different skills, but then learn to be flexible and adaptive and know when to use what. And as you kind of learn in your UX journey, it's really big to kind of, slowly learn it all, and then like build up that instinct of what's right. And so, and for this class, and as I mentioned in the boot camp that I had taken, I had gotten a project out of every single class. And I think one thing with that is if you are thinking about UX, think about like how you want to structure your projects. And if you do that earlier on, it really helps out when you're ready to build a portfolio, because you have a template laid out for yourself of how the projects are going to look. And so then it's easy for you to transfer that work into an online portfolio. And another thing to really highly consider is a PDF portfolio. Working at Amazon, when we do interviews at Amazon, we only look at PDF portfolios. So it's really important that you make a beautiful deck just as much as your online presence is, built out. So let's talk about user interaction. So this class was pretty big on UI. And so what we did here was we had built like an app, and all we did was like focus on the UI principles, which I'm going to be walking you through and giving you a quick rundown of it. And basically we learned that, and then we built an app and designed it completely from scratch, and we created our own design system for that. I think with the UI principles and just wanting to go beyond this, I think if you're really interested in being a UI designer, I would definitely look at Apple's human-centered design guidelines, and also Google Material Design. They're phenomenal just like resources to kind of get you up to speed within this realm. And especially if you're trying to be an iOS or Android designer, that's a great skill set. So some of the UI principles obviously consist of consistency, which is this idea that when you are designing, everything should look like it's one app. It should be consistent, where it's the buttons, the colors, the fonts. It should look like you're within this one experience and not going to completely different designs. The second principle is this idea of predictability. Again, this is this concept where a user, when they use your app, do they know that like what is going to be the outcome, and will they be able to predict that? You don't necessarily want an experience to be completely drastically different. And if that's the case, then I'll move into this idea of learnability, which is the fourth principle. Again, if you're having to teach your user something completely different, then you might have to think about this idea of onboarding and those kind of things. But with learnability, this concept of like, do users know how to use this experience? And if there is a learning curve, is it going to be really hard for them? And if that's the case, then maybe try to simplify it and make it as easy as possible. And again, being a designer at Amazon, we're really, really big on this idea of leadership principles, which one of them is simplify, invent, and simplify. So that is a big part of being a designer at Amazon. So again, if you're really having to push to teach your users how to learn your experience, maybe you reconsider and think about something that's a simpler experience. The third one being perceivability. Are users able to easily perceive and react? And they should be able to perceive like what's going to happen next. And then lastly, feedback. This could be an example where if someone is trying to delete something, they get a message saying, hey, you've now deleted this. Again, some sort of visual or audio feedback saying that they have done some sort of task. And then I would also want to tag on is accessibility, which I did not add on here, but that is an extremely, extremely important one. You want to think about folks that are, that have disabilities and you're designing for them. So always make sure to check on colors and if the colors have good enough contrast and sizes and all of that. And so I think what's important with these UI principles is, if you are thinking about if UX is right for you, these are great guardrails to kind of help you understand. And when you're designing, to always go back to something and refer, this is like, I need to change this because these principles exist. And, as a designer at Amazon, we have this idea of like design tenets, and we write design tenets for every single project we work on. And that, again, gives us this North Star to always refer back to something, and if we need to make a hard decision, we look at those tenets and it helps guide us for that decision. Cool. So moving on to visual design. So another class that I had taken was visual design principles. Again, this isn't necessarily UX, but it's, I would say more so on the graphic design, but it's extremely important. I think just to before I even dive into this, so I used to live in San Francisco. I'm in New York now. But what's interesting is in San Francisco, as a UX designer, and honestly, we use the word product designer, which would mean encompass everything, which is UX and UI. And so especially at a company like Amazon, when you do apply for a UX designer role, they do expect you to have UI skills, along with UI would fall, visual design would fall under UI. So I think, again, depending on which company you're working for, some might be very process heavy, which are specifically UX roles. But a lot of the roles that I've worked at, First Republic Bank, Afterpay, Amazon, they did require heavy skills on visual design and UI skills. So going into visual design, some of the principles we had walked through in the class was balance. Again, this idea of are elements balancing each other? Is there symmetry within the design? Scale, this concept of, if something is too big or if it's too little. Contrast of different colors and the color palette in general, pattern and how things are repeating, if there's visual elements such as single unit or multiple forms of the pattern, movement and rhythm. It's how the eyes move throughout the composition, leading attention from one aspect to another, and then how it repeats can basically create that rhythm. Emphasis, if something kind of sticks out at you, if it's photographs, beautiful imagery, or if it's titles. And then unity, how it all comes together. Does it, give a certain feeling or aesthetic for the mobile app or desktop? And so for this class, we had actually focused a lot on creating posters and websites, but again, it was very heavy on visual design. So we worked with typography, we worked with white space, with grids. Again, this is not necessarily needed to be a UX designer, but it really just depends on like how much you want to dabble into like the graphic design side of and understanding those theories. So again, this was an additional cost, which I understood that wasn't needed, but I think it gave me a really good groundwork of like understanding UI design, which is very much needed in my perspective. And then the next class is information architecture. So information architecture was actually a really difficult class. It was extremely heavy on Excel spreadsheets, and we did everything in Excel. And what we looked at was this idea of the structure of a website. So how is the navigation? Which pages roll up to what page? Does it make sense? Can it be simplified? So what we did was we did an audit of like a massive website. I think it was Sony or something like that. And we just questioned if the way they had defined the separate pages made sense, or if things needed to be moved around. And so I think what was great about this class was understanding like structure and understanding like, again, that idea of like simplification. And then lastly, like hierarchy. What should be on like the top of the page? Where, like, how do folks' eyes move? We learned, or users' eyes move. We learned this idea of the F or the Z, and it's actually like how a user looks at a page. Again, and depending on that, you'll want to put like major information in certain places. So again, this was a class which, I think you could potentially not have to take again, as I mentioned, but it's good to know like how to do an audit, and then like be able to use that in your UX design processes. Again, another class that I took, which I wouldn't necessarily say you need as a UX designer. I've actually never coded as a UX designer, but it was HTML, CSS, and this idea of learning how to create a website. So again, as I said, you don't necessarily need this class. I took it because I just wanted to understand the back end. I think what's more important about this class and in general about being a UX designer is understanding how to work with development and understanding what languages they speak, how does their logic work, and how does design fit into that. So a big part of UX is working with development, is working with product, is working with project managers, and how you fit into that ecosystem. So going back to Amazon, we're really big on the leadership principles, and one of them being have a backbone, meaning like you're gonna be able to, you have to stand up for what you believe, which is your designs. So again, if you can understand where development is coming from and understand the technical part, that's gonna give you a leg up. So again, this one, I wouldn't necessarily say you need to learn how to code, but it's wonderful plus to have, and again, it'll be beneficial as a UX designer. And then lastly, I took a class on portfolio, and we're gonna kind of go into like what it means to create a portfolio of your own, and kind of tips and tricks that I used. So the first and foremost, again, you don't necessarily need to take a portfolio class, but I think the big thing is as you're learning, starting this journey, think about how you're going to design your portfolio. Is that going to be on, Webflow? Is that going to be on Squarespace? Think about how you want to lay out your projects. Think about like how you want to templatize that, how you want your PDF to be. And then another big thing is think about your story, right? As I mentioned earlier, I come from finance, and so I leveraged that heavily when I transitioned into UX. And how I did that was I talked about my hobbies, where even though I was working in finance, I was always pursuing creative, side hobbies. I also originally was an architecture major, and I remember when I first took my UX design class, one of my professors said, architecture is the gateway drug to UX design. And so like for me, I kind of knew this was the right field. So as I was telling my story, architecture, there's a lot of folks that actually switch into UX. So again, that became a part of my story when I talked about my transition from finance to UX. Another thing I also did was I sat down and I wrote out everything I did in my, at the time, finance role and how that transitioned over to UX. So I think that's a wonderful exercise that you should be doing if you can, is, if you work in finance, if you work in accounting, if you're a lawyer, write down what it is that you're doing right now and see how that translates over to UX, and pull those parallels, and again, then write your story. So for me, when I was an account manager, I worked with a lot of clients, and there was a huge element of like empathy and understanding what my clients needed. And also I did a lot of user research. So again, I was really, really good at those skills, and I can pull those parallels. And what's great about doing an activity like this, if you are switching to UX, into a new role for UX, it'll help position you not as a junior, but you'll actually be coming in with some sort of experience, because your past, your current experience will be relevant in some sort of way. So again, try to position yourself and think about that story. What's really, really important also is think about that story in a branding sense. So create a logo for yourself and have that logo, all throughout your resume, your online portfolio, your PDF portfolio. Create a style guide just like you would do for any other website and app. Create buttons and different colors for yourself, and then have that flow all throughout and continue that story. I think with your portfolio, it's really important to bring your personality into it. Someone should be able to see it and say, oh, I know what type of design they're like. They would fit right into our company. And then, also get a sense of their personality. Something else that I had learned about in my portfolio class, which I think is really amazing, is this idea of a takeaway. And what I mean by takeaway is create something that you can give to, let's say, an interviewer or someone you meet that helps them remember you. And what I mean by that is that could be a thank you card that you design, that could be, a calendar that you design. For me, what I did was I actually created an about me video, and it's on my portfolio. It's a little outdated now, but it talks about my transition, my story, what type of a designer I am, what do I like to do, and it again helped me tell that really nice story of like why UX is perfect for me. So think about something that you can leave behind that makes everyone kind of remember you and say, oh, like this person was a really great designer and they left a really good impact. And then lastly, as I mentioned, with your portfolio, remember to create those templates, because it's going to make it really easy. And then I do want to say, like, if you do want to apply for any of the big tech companies, they normally like PDF portfolios. So you wouldn't walk through your online portfolio. So I would create a nice template for yourself with all your projects, even if they're different projects and different aesthetics. I would create one aesthetic and just have like all your work within that. And so, yeah, again, as I said, don't be afraid to bring in your personality, leverage your unique background. Like that's what's going to make you a great UX designer. And that's also going to make you diverse from everyone else. If you haven't studied design, as I said, like I didn't have a design background. Now I'm going to get my master's in design, but again, I didn't need that to get into this field. So leverage that unique background and let yourself like shine through the portfolio piece. And this should be like hopefully really fun for you to put together. So let's talk about like after your boot camp and you do all these like mock projects and you learn like what is kind of the best tactics of landing some projects. So I would say, like, as I mentioned, I was in my portfolio or in my certificate program for 2 years. I didn't finish my certificate program. I actually ended up getting a UX role before I finished. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a certificate to land a UX job. It just depends on like how motivated you are and how much you're willing to kind of put the work out there and really understand the UX process and show that work. And so one of the things in your portfolio project is obviously it's really important to have, obviously you're going to start off with having school projects and mock projects, but I would advise you as much as possible, even if you're doing a boot camp and learning along the way, is getting real work on your portfolio. And how you can do that is, first of all, I think start where you work. So for me specifically, I was at Thomson Reuters and I was working in account management, and a lot of it was was like, I asked around, I met with the design head, and I asked her, can I shadow you? Can I be on this project? Like, hey, I'm learning UX and I'm just really interested. I don't need to do any work. I would just love to just sit in on meetings. So see if you can tag team with someone, if you know someone who's a designer, anyone that let you just listen in on calls and try to kind of help out and design a little bit. Another way that you can land real work projects is hackathons. Hackathons are a great way because not only do they not take up too much of your time, it could potentially be 1 day or 2 days, but it's actual, sometimes real work that does get shipped. I used hackathons as a way to actually do work for non-for-profits that I was able to put onto my portfolio. Again, this all helped me land my first UX design job. And then lastly, I would say non-for-profit organizations. If there's organizations that you believe in and you love what they're doing, reach out to them, say, hey, I'm a UX designer, can I help? And just kind of help out and try to push those design updates onto their site. And again, that's creating a project for yourself. So it's a lot of coming down to, yes, it's going to be a lot of you initiating those, but people will be more than happy to take help, especially non-for-profits. So reach out to organizations, see where, you can help out, and see if you can tag team with someone, another designer, and you can kind of build some projects for your portfolio. And then finding a mentor. So a big part of my UX journey and success of my UX journey was my mentor. Again, as I mentioned, I found her at Thomson Reuters. So I think with mentorship, see if there's folks at your current job or friends that that are doing really, really well, and ask them for guidance, And I think with mentorship, it shouldn't just be a one-time thing. It should be someone that's there for you throughout your whole journey, as you're learning, as you can ask questions. When you're interviewing, I think mentorship is so important. So you can do mock interviews. Amazon interviews can be really intense, and it's really great to practice with someone for an interview for one of the big tech companies. If that's whiteboarding challenges, again, these kind of interviews, it's good to practice. And so I would start there. Let's say if you don't have that, there's a great organization that actually started up during COVID, and I'm actually a part of too, which is Amazing Design People List. They have an amazing roster of mentors that you can reach out to and see if you can connect with. I think with mentorship, it can be tricky, right? Like it needs to be organic a little bit too, and you also need to find someone that is really supportive, and actually you guys are on the same page of one, they're in an industry you want to be in and kind of doing the work that you want to do. So I would definitely try to find a mentor like that, but also you want to find a mentor that you have that chemistry and they're able to give you the feedback you need, and you're able to build a relationship. So I would definitely say with mentorship, it should be organic. So look for those relationships and mentors that are organic and it's not so much forced, but you truly see someone who's wow, I think you're an amazing designer, and who's willing to kind of give you some time and get you to where you need. And then lastly, LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, again, it's a little bit heavy on you as a designer having to reach out, but I think if someone, a lot of people are willing to provide that mentorship with LinkedIn too. So I definitely think leverage LinkedIn, reach out. But I think Amazing Design People List is definitely a great place to find a wonderful mentor. And then let's talk about the last step, which is getting your first UX gig. So, this is the most exciting part, which also can be very nerve-wracking. I want to talk about, again, my journey real quick. So I got my first UX gig, which was Afterpay, which I showed you originally, which was actually a contract position. It was a 1-year contract position. And then from there, I went to work at First Republic Bank, which was a 6-month contract position. And surprisingly, from there, I went to Amazon, which was actually a contract position, and I ended up converting to full-time. So as I mentioned, success story right there, contract and freelance is a great way to work at amazing companies, get great experience, and grow as a designer really quickly. So when you are starting to look at UX gigs, I would definitely advise looking at contract, looking at freelance, looking at part-time. Especially if you're new, try to get to work at as different companies as you can, try to work on different projects and challenges as you can, but also keep in mind the type of work that you want to do. So ask yourself those questions before you even start applying. What type of a company do I want to work for? What size of a company? What type of team environment do I want to work for? What is the design culture? Do I like what they're designing? Does it fit my aesthetic? And then again, look at those kind of companies and look at contract positions in those companies. So I do want to say, again, landing your first UX gig can be intimidating and can be hard, but some of these tips or some of these things that I wrote out will hopefully are a little bit easier. So I would say contract interviews a lot easier than full-time interviews. And again, it's a great way to build up your portfolio with projects and build up your experience before you do land a full-time, if that is the route that you want to go, because some people stay a contractor and freelancer for a long time because that just is what they love to do. And then another way that you can, again, build up your experience is UX agencies. UX agencies are phenomenal with getting you great experience on different companies and different projects as quickly as possible. Again, if you are new to UX, the more you can learn and the different type of work you can do, the stronger of a designer you'll become and the faster you'll actually move up. And then, as I mentioned with storytelling, for me, it was really big. Part of my storytelling was like being in fintech and financial services. So it was very easy for me to find roles within that world because I did come from a finance background and I understood, the business model and what it means. So Afterpay was a fintech payments company. So again, having a finance background really helped me land that first project again. So again, if you're struggling a little bit, you can potentially look at industries that maybe align up with your current industry. And again, that could be just like your step into the door for a UX position, and then maybe your next gig could be something that you actually want to, an industry you're more excited about. And then lastly, I just want to talk about like internships and apprenticeships. Amazon actually has a great UX design apprenticeship program, and we actually don't require a lot of experience for it. We just require you to have like design thinking processes and then showing projects for that. So I would definitely look at like different internships and apprenticeships. Again, great way to kind of get some great UX experience and then like fully moving into being a UX designer. But yeah, as you're going through this, I think it's really important to support yourself with good designers and building a community around having a really great like one or two mentors who are guiding you through this entire process, from like the knowledge part to like the interviews to getting like projects and then obviously landing your first gig. And what's really important is also like knowing how to level yourself, like what is the right pay? Those are great questions to ask a mentor and a community of people, again, which seems like ProApp has a wonderful community. So I would leverage the people that you're surrounded by right now and talk to them, see what they're doing, see how they're problem solving, because that's going to really help you learn how to collaborate with other designers and then build that community for yourself as you move throughout this journey. So again, as I said, I want to just reiterate, I came from, learning UX from a boot camp, and I was able to move into this field completely without an undergrad and a master's degree. I think the biggest thing is take your time and enjoy your UX journey. I would say like when I first took my class, I was not confident at all. I was like, wow, I don't think I'll be able to get into this. But the more and more I learned, the more and more confident I became with my UX mindset and skills. But yeah, just like enjoy that journey. It's really an amazing field. And, I am able to create work that is touched by millions of people and really make an impact. So I do think it's a really hot field in the sense of like there's amazing jobs out there and you really can be making an impact with your designs, which I absolutely love doing. So Yeah, and thank you. That is my presentation.
Thank you, Sana, so much for. I think you almost navigated your entire journey from how you started and how your conversion. You decided that okay, UX was the path for me, and I think this is what most of the young designers were still trying to figure out. Like even not designers were trying to just enter into the field. They want to know, they want to understand. So I think that was great to hear about your journey. I think it's time we'll take some questions. Okay, so the most basic question: what is the difference between UX and UI design?
Yeah. And that's a really good question, right? And so, like, I touched on this a little bit. In San Francisco and in the Bay Area, folks are called product designers, which encompass UX and UI. And so UX is heavy on this idea, and as I walk through, is process. It's this idea of empathizing, understanding your customers, problem solving, and then it's defining who your users are, then brainstorming, then creating prototypes, and then validating. With UI is just focused on the design part. And that is when you're doing, and a UI designer could be amazing at creating design systems, for example, where they're focused on creating buttons and figuring out colors and typography. So UI kind of just goes into one element of the UX process, which is the design phase. And so, as I mentioned, the program I took covered UX and UI, but you don't necessarily need to be a UI designer. But me, after I started going into the field, I learned that UI is a pretty important skill set. Again, depending on what company you decide to work for, but it is pretty important. And a lot of it, because UX is so new, a lot of companies don't even understand when they say UX, they actually do want a UI designer too. And so it's kind of like, if you're a UI designer, you don't necessarily need to be a UX designer, but if you're a UX designer, you kind of need to know UI skills and user research and all these other things. So I would definitely say that's, And so again, as I mentioned, like, I think it's important. I would definitely highlight to learn those UI skills.
Right. And I think this is the most important aspect in everything we do in the digital world today. Like I apply those same principles from UX into marketing and content, so that the principles of accessibility, better readability and everything. So I think that's how it's still connected, and UX holds that throne that formulates and branches out the rest of the disciplines of designs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so one thing to note, right, like working at Amazon, they already have design systems. So a lot of companies, when you do work there, they'll have design systems. So it's not like you're going to be building UI elements from scratch. Time to time, you might need to. But if you do work at a startup, you will need to build, buttons and stuff out of scratch. So again, it comes down to your goals of like where you want to work and what type of work you want to do. So
okay. The next question is around what is the biggest differences you noticed from your finance career to an experienced designer?
Oh, wow. So many. I think there's drastic differences. Okay, so in finance, obviously what I did was account management. And so I was doing a lot of like relationship building, and we were working on like products and selling products actually to executives at Google and Facebook. And so I was working in the tech industry. So for me, it was heavy on like understanding user needs. So that was actually very similar to UX, where it comes down to like understanding user needs and empathizing. But I think the difference is the work that I felt I did when I was in finance didn't make me feel like I was making an impact, versus working in UX, like I truly feel like, wow, like I designed something and millions of people are looking at it and using it. You know, like right now at Amazon, like you really feel it. And not only that, you're working on a team full of like amazing and talented designers. So I think just like being in a tech org in general is drastically different from being in a finance org. The way tech orgs run are very different also. And again, like learning to understand like the back end technology and working with product managers. So I think this is a way more collaborative field, but it's also a lot more work for sure. But again, the impact and the you feel great about what you're doing. So
Right. So there's another one. How often do you review and change your portfolio?
oh yeah, I think a designer is like, you'll design your portfolio and then 6 months later you're like, I need to redo this. So I feel like it's one of those things where it's constantly evolving. So I built my portfolio when I graduated, or when I finished my certificate program, which was like almost like 3 years ago. I haven't like changed it, and I want to change it. I actually want to move to Webflow, which if you are in the process of potentially creating a portfolio, you should definitely look at Webflow, because it's phenomenal and it has a lot of flexibility of animations and just really fun stuff you can do. I made mine on Squarespace. If it was very static, and I actually had to go in and do a lot of HTML, CSS, which again, I'm not the best at. I can understand it. But I think with a portfolio, like I would say, like, I wish I had been on a website that was a little easier to like update. Squarespace has gotten outdated now. So now it's almost like I have to do more work. But I try to update mine every like year at least and add the new projects in. But again, it does get hard to keep up with. So try to create templates for yourself, which make it easy for you to easily add in new projects, and maybe choose a platform that again is easy to update. But I would say like at least once a year you should be updating. And I would like to do that. I'm just a little bit behind. So
okay, so the next one is around what are some of your recommendations for preparing for UX design interviews?
yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, again, it depends on like what company you're applying for. A company like Amazon and even Facebook, they're really big on whiteboarding challenges and app critiques. So if you're new to UX, I would practice app critiques, which is this idea of like you're looking at an app and you're going through it and doing maybe like a UI heuristics evaluation. You're looking at if there's consistency, if there's feedback, if if the experience makes sense, and you're talking about that out loud. And then for whiteboarding challenge, it's all about like doing like a quick project. So for Amazon, we do this over an hour, and you work with the designer and they give you a prompt, and you just have to go through problems, create a persona, create user flows, and come up with ideas. So I would say like the best way to prepare for interviews is practice those, and then obviously create like a portfolio presentation and practice that with friends and mentors. So short answer.
There is a question which I don't completely understand, but it is around, can I do all that with my Android? Not sure what that question is around. Maybe it was asked basically during some part of your presentation, a specific part. I think we can skip this. Okay, so next one is around, I started my learning journey of UX 6 months back, but got lost in between. Want to start again. So does that happen to people? Yes, to everyone.
So as I said, as my last giveaway, take it slow. It's a lot of information. And I know sometimes when you take a boot camp and it's like take some classes and they're like 3 months and you've learned it all. But again, it's about like, you know, when you learn like a new language, for example, like it takes time to become second nature. I think it's okay. You know, for me, I literally took my UX journey, and I'm not joking. Like when I first started the class, I was like, I can't do this. Like I can't become a designer. And here I am like 3 years later working at a phenomenal company. So you are going to have your ups and downs, and that's so big of like, again, having a community of folks to talk to, help you like get back up and continue onwards of like, where are you stuck? So I think it's totally normal, and it happens to everyone. But again, take your time, maybe like make your tasks a little bit smaller and easy to digest, and go a little bit less fast to kind of get you back up.
Okay, so the other one is around, I'm a UX designer having 2 years experience and currently pursuing computer science. Will it be a good choice to pursue human computer interaction? It's AI.
And CSE, computer science engineering. Okay. Again, I think that's like a personal question. Like, it's like, what do you care about more? In a sense, you are design, like one is designing and one is developing. So in a sense, you're creating, but it just comes down to like, what type of like work do you want to do? Do you want to be developing and using like logic for your day-to-day, or do you want to actually be thinking about design processes and looking at data, looking at user research and how that impacts your designs? So again, I think that just comes down to like personal preference. I think, of course, you're talking to a UX designer, and I'm going to say yes, but it just depends on like what type of work you want to do day to day. And maybe that for you, a good question would be talking to a UX designer and just asking them, hey, can I see what you're working on, and just see what their day to day looks like? And that could be a next best step for you.
Actually, when I was pursuing my engineering, HCI was one of the subjects which was taught to us to, that time neuroscience was just growing. And so to help us understand that and how understand the human psychology, and everything, it was included as a subject. And I think that was the most important, like most interesting subject. And I scored the highest in that subject. But yes, definitely, if you get a chance, you should, I think, read a lot, not necessarily go and pursue entirely, but have a knowledge about it. Like it never gets you on the losing end.
Yeah, I definitely second that, because I think developers that understand UX then are designing products that are customer focused and not just like, oh, this is what we can create or develop. They're actually thinking from a user perspective, and that's really important. So definitely second what you said.
Okay, so the next one is as far as tech companies, I would prefer a small team in a good cultured company. What are your recommendations? So he's currently learning blockchain to get into Web3. So he's just asking your recommendation. David prefers a small team in a good culture company.
I mean, there's so many companies out there. I would say like, I would look at like design that you like. You know, like there is obviously like Afterpay was like actually a really small design team, and it was a fintech company. And then their competitors are Affirm and Klarna. And then again, they're all like smaller design teams, but they have phenomenal design. So I would just like honestly look at apps that you use that you're like, wow, this design is amazing, and then see like what their design culture is. I think what's really important is, when you do start working as a designer, does design have a seat at the table at the company? That is extremely important, because if you're working at a company that's development led, the decisions are going to be different. But if you're working at a company that values design, you're going to be able to have such a big say, and you're going to be able to not have to like fight those battles of making stakeholders understand UX design's benefit, but that's already going to be taken care of. And so I would definitely highly advise everyone who is new to UX, find a culture that does value design and understand the benefit of it. But yeah, I don't think I have like necessarily like companies right off the bat to kind of tell you, but I think smaller companies is a great way. And that's actually how I got into UX. but I also would say like working at a company like Amazon, like you are around so many designers. And so that's like in itself is awesome to be around too. So, maybe it's good to kind of have a small company, a big company, and then find like what you actually really enjoyed and just be open to it. So
I think I completely second that. I started with a big company. I started working as a developer in IBM and then moved to Accenture. Then I started my UX writer with a startup my career as a UX writer. There I understood that, okay, actually there's a place for me at the table, like how you said it. So, and there I developed my skills and learned more about it. And eventually you can go and, go back to the big companies where you'll get time to, gel with others, learn from the other experienced designers. Because in a startup, sometimes you are the most experienced one. You don't have someone on top of you, right? So,
yeah. And I think like for me, my big thing was like, I don't want to be this like the only designer and the smartest designer. I want people to be way better than me, because then I get to learn from them and be even better. And like growth is really important. Self-awareness as a designer is extremely important too, of like where you think you lie on strengths and weaknesses, and then like working on those like weaknesses and continuing to evolve. So
right. Okay, so I think we have time for 3-4 more questions. We'll take those. How do you deal with work relationships as a designer?
And do you mean like product management and development, or is there like specific relationships do you mean, or like with designers, or?
I think as a designer with the other teams, maybe,
Yeah, I think with that, like for me, I think it's really, really important about building like a healthy environment where everyone feels heard and you can share your thoughts. I think sometimes designers can also be introverts too, and that's difficult too, right? To then learn how to speak up and talk about your ideas, especially being a new designer. It's like you're already working on feeling confident with your work, and then now you have to like go up against product and development. So again, I think when it comes to work relationships, I always try to create a healthy environment where everyone has a voice. And I think big with cross collaboration, I think it just comes down to, let me think about this. For me, I like to get everyone involved in projects earlier and all be on the same page. I think alignment is really, really important, and also like getting perspective early. So for me, when I'm collaborating with PMs and development, I don't want to go show them my work when everything is completed. I want them to be involved in my work earlier, so they're giving me feedback and we have like a good relationship. So I think when it comes to like building relationships, earning trust with these folks are extremely important, and you need to understand that as a UX designer, you are an asset to the team. You're not just like designing like, hey, they give you this and you just become this machine. And when you're new, I feel like you will also might tend to say yes to a lot of things. So know that it's okay to say no, know that you're important asset, and know that like what you bring to the table, and like be able to have that relationship with these folks. So again, I think those are the kind of things that I make sure to put in place when I have these, meetings.
Okay, it's the jewelry brand you created is for both men and women.
Yes, it is. It's a unisex jewelry brand, and then we're we manufacture in New York and everything. So definitely follow us on Instagram as well. So it's a surprise, it's a project of mine. So thank you.
Interesting question. I'll just send him them link. Okay. So human psychology attracts me a lot. How much will it be beneficial to my UX career? I guess
a lot. Like I think there's so many people that actually have a psychology background that move into this. But what's interesting, right? So again, depending on what company you work for, if you work for a startup, you will be doing everything from UX to UI to user research. At Amazon, for example, we have user researchers that focused on psychology backgrounds that do the user research, and you do the designs. So if you are someone who likes the user research side, you could just focus on user research. If you want, you could solely just be a user researcher, or you could work for, a company that allows you to do the user research and UX. But yes, extremely important. I recently spoke to a designer at Amazon, and they were designing this product called Chime, which is like Zoom basically. And he was going through like all this like psychology around like when people are on video, a lot of people don't turn on their video. And so then like Zoom, for example, it's all like black screens, right? So what they did was design like little circles with like photographs, again, to give a presence that you're there. And again, this is this whole idea of psychology, right? Because now you're like earning trust with these people, even though your video is not on, but they have an element that you are in the room. So again, these little things like really, really matter. And it's so important to understand how humans work to be able to design for them. So 100%, I think if you're interested, great field for you.
Okay, I think we'll take two more questions. It's around UX job generally entails a lot of meetings, which can be overwhelming. Do you have any advice for the introverts who are aspiring to be UX designers?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this, right? Like,
right.
And I think over time, like you'll definitely work on being more confident. I think at Amazon, we have a lot of meetings. I would say like block off your calendar and be like, listen, I'm going to be heads down and I'm going to be working, and that's okay. And I think part of like, yes, if you're an introvert, but also knowing that you can say no, and you can say this is unrealistic and I also need downtime to do my work. So start practicing that. And maybe that's by just saying, hey, I'm just not going to be taking meetings in this time because I need to design. And slowly just practice your, that like saying no, speaking up a little bit. And again, over time, you'll get more and more confident. And I would say I have trouble with that. Like I've gotten that feedback too of like my personality. I sometimes like to say yes. And so I have to also stop a little bit and maybe think about it of like, does this actually make sense? And should I be saying yes? Again, think of yourself as a partner to these other teams, and you're an asset. You are not someone that is a machine that's just designing. And if you think of yourself as an asset and a resource, then you should be able to say no, and you should be able to say, this is what I need, and this also makes sense. And they should want to hear you out, regardless of if you're an introvert or not, and however you speak about that.
Awesome. Okay, the last question is, I'm 40 years old. I have experience in software and business and branding and psychology. Is it too late for me to start?
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all. I mean, like I said, like I had a great career before I went into UX. I think that was the biggest thing, where it's like you clearly have experience in software and business. So it's like if you started in UX, you're not starting from scratch. You're gonna build some skills on top of that and continue the skills that you have learned the past 20 years and add on to that. So again, it's so important for you to like create a story and looking at companies that are potentially like that you've already worked at and understand, and then build those UX skills. So I don't think so. UX again is a new career, and I'm telling you, in the US at least, there's so many amazing jobs for UX. I'm constantly talking to different folks that are moving into the career and being so successful. And I have only moved into this back in 2017, so it's only been like 4 or 5 years for me, and I'm working at a phenomenal company. And I think especially for you, like, yes, you'd have to start over, but you'll move up in UX so quickly because you have been a working professional for so long. So I totally think it's not too late, and it's a great field. So
okay, one last question. How do you deal with short deadline projects, and what's your design process?
Yeah, so like, as I said, like I walked through so many design processes with you today. And as a designer, it's about building your instinct of figuring out like what processes do you best use when. And so for deadlines, before I even start a project, I like to create proposals for my team, and I share them like, hey, this is my process that I'm going to be doing in the let's say if it's a tight deadline of 1 month, I show them exactly what I'm going to be doing in that 1 month and timelines. So that way they know. And if it's unreasonable to hit that deadline, voice that in the beginning. That shouldn't be something where you get to the end where you're like, wait, we don't have enough time. Voice it in the beginning and push back in the beginning if you just think it's super unrealistic. But if the company still says, hey, you need to get this done, then have a clear proposal of what you're going to be doing. And if that's skipping steps, they just need to know that you won't be able to do everything, right? You only have so many hours in the day. So I would say set up that proposal, be very clear about your timelines, be really clear about your process. And if you need to, push back in the beginning, not later on. And I think, that kind of helps.
Right. I think somehow that was one hell of a workshop, and I completely enjoyed it. And it was the first workshop we conducted in the morning, and still a lot of audience showed up. There were around 40-50 people, and that's great. I think it feels like a part of a small community, and I always say it in every workshop that design is nothing without its community, right? So it's like the community is so tightly knitted, and they are helping each other grow. And we have been conducting free workshops for almost 8 months, and like 30 workshops, and people are like ready to do it. They say money doesn't matter, right? At this point, it's essential that the people who are wanting to enter into the industry, they should know, they should take the right path and not make the mistakes we made. So I think thanks a lot. Thanks for the value that you have added today, and I think we'll do it soon again. And
yeah,
all the best.
I really appreciated this, and yeah, thanks everyone for letting me speak for the past hour and a half. But yeah, I mean, I would say good luck. Connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out if you have questions. I've been through this. I did the whole switch. And honestly, I'm here rooting for you, getting to where I am too. So I think that's a lot of what you need is just other folks to believe and get you there too. So yeah, thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Anna. Have a good night. I would say that. Have a good sleep. I would have a good rest of the day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.